Hi, Mike Mercer. I'd like to welcome you to Empower You. Tonight's discussion is titled Ohio's Fracking Wastewater Problem. And we're going to have a small panel this evening. We usually have just one guest, but tonight we have two. And they're on both sides of this issue. So we have Mike Chadsey, who's the Director of External Affairs at the Ohio Oil and Gas Association, and then Roxanne Groff, who's an oil industry activist and grassroots organizer. So again, this will be a panel discussion, and we welcome any questions from the audience. You can submit them through the usual Q&A. I'd like to introduce both Roxanne and Mike, our guest tonight. Roxanne is she's a graduate of Ohio University, and she lives in Athens County. And she's a longtime oil and gas industry activist, and she was started off in 1978. She was a founding member of Save Our Rural Environment, SORE, which was a grassroots group that protested the permitting of strip mines in eastern Athens County. And then she held local public office for 12 years. She was a county commissioner. And I believe we also a town trustee, Roxanne?
I was 8 years.
You were. Okay, so and a town trustee. And then most recently, she's been involved in the Athens County Fracking Action Network, which is a group that opposes the permitting of these fracking wastewater storage sites. So she's been sort of organizing against that. So I'd like to welcome you, Roxanne.
Thank you. Very good to be here, Mike.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And then Mike Chadsey. Mike is the Director of External Affairs for the Ohio Oil and Gas Association. And Mike, you've been in that position for 12 years, I understand?
Yes.
So you've been doing that for a while. And in this position, Mike builds relationships with local communities and business leaders throughout the state. And he was the first state director of the Energy In-Depth Ohio, which was a grassroots advocacy organization that did research, provided education, and organized in support of responsible oil and gas development. Mike graduated from Kent State with a degree in political science, and you live in northeastern Ohio, Mike, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Summit County.
Okay. So the format, we want to have like a discussion and hear both sides of this issue. And the format we're going to use is I want to start off for the audience's benefit. Not that I'm an expert, so I'm going to walk through just very briefly, 2 to 3 minutes, what I know about fracking, just so we have a common knowledge. Fracking, what fracking is, how it produces wastewater, and then why the wastewater needs to be stored. And I welcome Mike and Roxanne to chime in if I get any details wrong or just to add, context. So feel free to just step in. And then what we want to do is Mike and Roxanne are going to take turns. They're going to take about 5 minutes just presenting their views. And I believe there's some slides to share too. So they're going to take 5 minutes just to say, this is how I look at this issue. And then we'll start a discussion. And again, the audience can feel free to submit any questions they want to ask. So just to start off, so the audience, we have some context. So my understanding is that in traditional oil and gas drilling, they drill vertically down and open up a well. And with fracturing, which is really called hydraulic fracturing, what they're doing is they're drilling vertically, and then the drill goes horizontally, and it breaks into rock. So it's drilling into rock, and it's injecting a mixture of water and chemicals under pressure to break up the rock and to extract the oil and gas. Is that accurate? How fracking works?
Yeah, we hydraulically fracture vertical and directional and horizontal wells.
Okay, so you do it vertically and horizontally. Okay. But so you break up the rock, you extract the oil and gas, but you also have to pull out those chemicals that you injected. Is that correct? Okay. So they extract the chemicals, which have, ingredients that are toxic, and they need to be safely stored. And so my understanding is with this storage issue is they basically find deep underground rock formations where there isn't osmosis. So the idea is that the liquid isn't going to seep osmotically and spread throughout the area and contaminate, the other property outside that area. It's supposed to remain contained in the area it's injected in. Is that correct? Yeah, that's accurate. Okay.
Kind of, yeah. It's a good simplistic way that, yeah.
Well, if there's anything, feel free. If you want to add anything, I'm just describing the process before we get into the issues. So,
yeah. I guess I could add, maybe we should call it disposal instead of storage. I mean,
okay.
there's storage is kind of a little bit misconception that it's actually stored somewhere. There is temporary storage for solid waste, but when you're dealing with the toxic radioactive oil and gas waste brine that is injected into and I have a slide if you want that up. It's number 2 on my
okay
list,
but just to be clear, what you're saying is storage implies it's temporary, and you're saying it's being disposed of permanently. That's how it's thought of.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. So the issue we have in Ohio, the reason we're discussing this is Ohio stores this fracking wastewater, not just for the drilling that's taking place in eastern Ohio, but we also store wastewater from fracking that's taking place in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. So the idea is that we must have, I guess, according to the standards here, favorable geological conditions, right? That makes it a good place to sort of dispose of the wastewater. Is that correct?
That's the theory. That's the theory.
Yeah, that's definitely a big element is the geology. Sure.
Okay. So the reason this has come up is I heard a few months ago, there was a story, I think I was listening to NPR, and they did a story on a lawsuit that was taking place. There was someone in eastern Ohio who was saying that he had a large property and like 50 of his own oil wells. So these were oil wells that he was producing to make money, and he's claiming they were contaminated. So his oil wells were contaminated by fracking wastewater that had been stored or disposed of, that had osmotically seeped out and gotten into his wells. And he said it ruined his oil business, basically his oil production business. So that's what sort of prompted this, hearing about the that lawsuit and looking into it a little further and realizing it's a big issue, not just in Ohio, but I guess the national issue for some. There are other instances of this. So that's what motivated this. So now I'd like to give Mike and Roxanne an opportunity to sort of lay out their position. I don't know. Do you want to go first, Mike, or have
it doesn't matter. Roxanne, feel free to go.
Okay. Would you like to go first, Roxanne?
Yeah, either way.
You go right ahead. You go right ahead, Mike. That's fine.
So you just want to share your screen, Mike?
Yep.
You have slides? Is that what you're going to do?
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. We appreciate the invite and good to be with Roxanne on this issue. We were kind of joking early on that we've done this a number of times in a number of venues in a number of counties around the state over the last decade plus. So just my intent this evening is to maybe answer some of the questions, address some of the issues that are out there from our perspective on the issue that Mike and we'll probably talk about here in a little bit, but was brought up, as well as kind of the larger scope of oil and gas, because hydraulic fracturing or fracking is really just one element. Disposal, storage, transportation, all that is another element. So they're all related. Want to give you a quick overview of some of that stuff, where it's happening, a little bit of history, a little bit of forward-looking stuff, and then, happy to answer questions afterwards. So I'm from the Ohio Oil and Gas Association, been here all 12, 15 years now, and enjoy doing this stuff. So obviously tonight we're talking about waste. It's really interesting as you get into, energy sectors around Ohio and the country and the globe. I mean, there are waste streams from every energy source: nuke, coal, wind, oil and gas. And so that's one of the dynamics that all of us need to manage and have laws to mitigate those risks and educate on those topics, because there is, challenges in the production, on the transportation, the storage and disposal of all of these elements. And so a little bit about how we got there in this industry. So Ohio has about 275,000 oil and gas wells drilled throughout the years. You can kind of see, if you're familiar with the map, it's really Cleveland to Marietta, east to 77. Typically, when you see oil gas maps, if you see it in red, that will be natural gas. If you see it in green, that will be oil. The one outlier is kind of that northwest of Ohio, right? That's the Lima Finley oil field. That's where John D. Rockefeller made all of his money, and that's why there are a number of crude oil refineries up there. And so 49 of our 88 counties have seen some type of oil and gas development. Ironically, for the folks on the call from Cincinnati, you are one of those counties that has really no oil and gas history, past, present, or future. And so oil and gas is where oil and gas was. So a lot of the vertical, shallow, low volume, low pressure wells that we drilled ever since the 1800s up till more recently, the shale stuff has really been mostly in the same place. And if you are not aware, the first discovery of crude oil was actually in Noble County. There's a Thurl McKee well. It's on 78, just outside of Caldwell on the way to Woodsfield. That's basically between Noble and Monroe County. As the sign dictates and as legend tells us, there were a couple of guys named Thurl McKee looking for salt brine, which is a very important commodity in the 1800s. They saw deer licking the ground, which was often an indication there was salt there. And so they said, hey, this is probably where we can get it. What they found, though, was actually crude oil. Back then, didn't know what it was. They were sopping up with rags and blankets just to get it out of the way to try to get to that salt brine. So in that image, you see the kind of the black cage there, the gravel, and then in the middle, that is an old tree trunk. That was the original casing. That is still there today. And if you wait, 5 minutes, you'll see a little bit of crude bubble to the surface. So we have been working at this since 1814. The first commercial well was in 1860. So long history of oil and gas development here in the state of Ohio. So that's a little bit about yesterday. What about today? I'll show you a chart from the 1990s up until the last year or so. Again, we're talking green, so that's oil. So if you go back to the 90s and 2000, this is our conventional oil production. Then you can kind of see 12, 13, 14. That's when the Utica really started coming online. And you see the amount of crude oil being produced from unconventional oil, shale wells, horizontal, however you may describe them. We call them conventional, unconventional, basically because a conventional well was drilled into a conventional reservoir, the Clinton, the Berea. Unconventional is the Utica formation. That was a formation we really hadn't drilled into in the past. And so that's just kind of a scope on the oil side. Where's that all taking place? Quite a few counties, but the biggest oil producing counties are Carroll, Harrison, and Guernsey County. That represents most of the production of crude oil here in Ohio. Same side on the gas side. Again, it's kind of red, so you're looking at gas. Same chart, the 90s through just the last couple of years. Very low but consistent natural gas development, and you can kind of see how it's taken off in the early 14, 15, 16 years and then have leveled off since then. And similar to that last map, you can kind of see where it's taking place. Jefferson, Belmont, and Monroe counties. And so those are our big 8, 10 counties where we're producing the most crude oil and natural gas. And in sort of breaking that down, you can kind of see when it peaked and it valleyed, and you look at maybe in 21 when COVID hit and, demand went down drastically, using jet fuel as an example. I mean, almost overnight jet fuel demand went down by about 80%. And then that has certainly come back up. Very similar on the gas side, kind of straight up. And then over time, even during COVID, because folks are still at home, so maybe not as much transportation fuel, but still using heating, electricity, and, natural gas for cooking. So that remained pretty consistent. So just want to give you a quick snapshot of kind of what is going on today in Ohio, particularly eastern and southeastern Ohio. But more germane to this particular conversation, along with the hydrocarbons of crude oil and natural gas, we're going to get brine production flow back during the initial phase of that well and then brine for the lifetime of that well. And so we kind of dug into these numbers recently, and just going back from 2011, we saw a pretty big increase in brine injected in Ohio. But ever since about 2019, it continues to go down, 35% decrease really since the peak in 18. And that is for a couple of reasons. One, we're seeing more water sharing agreements from our oil and gas producers, meaning if I have a well and you have a well, maybe I'm drilling, but you're not, I could take some of your water for my next frac job, and then vice versa. We're seeing quite a bit more recycling. And then at the end, this water does reach its useful life and will be injected. But I think we're seeing different operators figure out frac stages, how often and how far apart these wells are being hydraulically fractured, the sand content, the chemical content, how much water at volumes and rates and pressures. So sort of mixing all of that together and sort of learning we are injecting less barrels of brine every year here in the state of Ohio, both what we call in-district and out-of-district, meaning in-state and out-of-state. So where is that really happening? It's very similar to where you saw the oil and gas production. A little bit northwest Ohio, northeast Ohio, where I'm from. And then you can kind of see right from, again, Cleveland to Marietta along 77, where that injection well is taking place. So Tuscarawas County, Guernsey County, Washington County, and a little bit in northeast Ohio from the barrels that come over from Pennsylvania. So breaking that down just a little bit further, over the last couple of years, Tuscarawas County had the most injection, followed by Washington, Guernsey, Noble, Muskingum, and then a number of other counties that have what we call Class 2, or what we refer to as UIC, underground injection control wells. And so that's kind of a snapshot of that injection here in the state of Ohio. Part of that is because we produce our own brine that we inject here in Ohio, but we also take brine from Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, Ohio does not have the ability to reject that, just like solid waste from trash and landfills and things of that nature. So part of that, and this is kind of where the conversation started, was because of the geology of Ohio. Our sandstones are more receptive to injection of water versus some of the other formations in Pennsylvania, Michigan, West Virginia. Part of that is in West Virginia and PA, the US EPA will issue permits for Class 2 injection wells, whereas in Ohio, we use the US EPA rules, but the state issues the permit. And so some opportunities there for permitting. And so when you combine those two issues, and then early on, Pennsylvania started to use waste municipal facilities to try to clean brine. They were having a challenge removing what you call TDS, total dissolved solids. And so using a municipal wastewater treatment facility wasn't working. And so we have been using injection wells since about the 80s here in Ohio. 82 was when really Ohio got primacy to run this issue. And so we had what you might call a little bit of a head start compared to our sister states. We have the state program and also the geology. Injection wells were sort of the section option. The original option were evaporation pits. Dig a hole, put a liner in, put the water in, eventually the water will evaporate, and then you can remove the salt or bury the salt because that's really what was left over. So injection wells are basically putting the water back where it came from, oftentimes in a similar but different formation. Sometimes that water will be injected into a sandstone or maybe a deeper rock as well too. So what we refer to or injection wells are the environmental solution because it's putting that brine back where it came. And a little bit on the future in terms of because production and injection are ultimately very related. If you go to the EIA, which is the Energy Information Administration out of the Department of Energy, and it will go all the way back to the founding of our country up until just recently, you can kind of track petroleum, natural gas, renewables, coal, nuclear, and you see how they've ebbed and flowed over the years. We don't really use a lot of wood anymore. Certainly other countries still do. We don't do that here in the U.S. Coal is no longer king. That once had its heyday, and less and less coal is mined and burned all the time. Nuclear seems to have a bright future, particularly with, as was mentioned, these SMRs. Renewables, there have been a lot of renewables that have been added on the grid, not only here in Ohio, but across the country, pointing to places like Texas and certainly out west. And then with gas and oil, bright futures there as well too. Natural gas, particularly with natural gas fired power generation, has a nice upside as well too. So just want to say that because we have so much of production, but also the consumption, we will continue to have to try to manage our brine that is being produced with these hydrocarbons as well. So with that, the last slide here, and we'll certainly get ready for conversation, but because of the conversation that's happening today, just not only on fuels and heating, but a lot of it is on power generation. You can kind of see here again an EIA slide. We've added quite a bit of gigawatts from natural gas fired power plants and a number from wind and solar as well too. Where we've seen our retirements are from coal. And so part of it is the natural gas and renewables replacing those coal-fired generation plants here in Ohio and across Appalachia. So as we, there's certainly, more Teslas on the road, and there's certainly more efficiencies and electrification of home appliances and various other issues. We're seeing more demand for electricity. And a lot of that is coming from natural gas-fired power plants. So gas, brine, hydrocarbons, all very much interconnected. And so that's why it's important that Ohio and our sister states have good common sense rules that manage, brine, transportation, storage, and disposal. So those are my thoughts, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of run through that real quickly. There's certainly more we can get into, but using 5 or 6 minutes here, I just want to give you a snapshot of Ohio's oil and gas industry.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, Mike. Roxanne?
Yeah, that was a lot. Okay, let's do a lot from the other side of things. Let's really talk about what's happening with the disposal of toxic radioactive waste from oil and gas extraction. So, Jerry, if you put up the first slide, and what you're looking at is, this says toxic radioactive oil and gas waste brine. For those of you who might have thought or might be thinking that brine is a nice, clear, salty liquid, it is not. This is what it looks like. This is an open pit in Athens County. This was my first experience with what injection well sites look like. Open pits are very rarely found in Ohio anymore. They were outlawed a number of years ago. But this was the first well that I became familiar with before applications for the newer and bigger injection wells.
I have a quick question for you. So just to be clear for the audience, this is not a storage area. This is where it was extracted, right? The oil
This is an injection well site.
Oh, it is. Okay.
This is what injection well sites looked like for many, many years. Many of them have closed down. It took 10 years for us in Athens to get this one closed. It closed 6 years ago and still is not plugged because our wonderful Department of Natural Resources has not gone after this company to actually get it plugged and get it totally out of commission. It's not out of commission until it's plugged. So this slimy black water that you're looking at is, when I presented this to Mary Mertz, on a well, trying to bring up the subject matter of new injection well applications, she didn't know what this was. And Scott Kell, a former employee of ODNR, said, well, this is TNORM. This is technically enhanced natural occurring radioactive material. When this well closed, go ahead.
I just want to clarify for the audience. So, because this confused me, looked into this too. So injection well is the term that's used for the storage after the well's been mined.
The injection, I'll get to a slide to show you what an injection well actually looks like. I just wanted people to know what got me started and what got people in Athens County started in protesting injection wells in our community. This was the first one that came to our attention. Like I said, we closed it. It had so many violations over the 35 years of its existence that ODNR could not help but finally say to the company, you need to abandon and plug this well. The injection site itself is you can't see it. There is actually I'll show you the next slide. And you can see from here who I work with. These are the classes of injection wells, and the one that we're most interested in is of course the class 2 well, and and like Mike said, the Department of Natural Resources has primacy for oversight of these wells. And as you can see, there's a well bore, and it goes into a formation, a geological formation that's supposed to be approved by ODNR, that is supposed to be safe and safely confine the toxic radioactive oil and gas waste. It's a pipe through the ground, steel pipe with casing and cemented, all of which we know cement deteriorates and steel can corrode, which it does under circumstances of years of use. Right now, there are about 238 Class 2 wells with the oversight by, like I said, ODNR, the Department of Natural Resources. Now, I think a point of interest is that when hydraulic horizontal fracking started in Ohio around 2010-11, there were only 144 Class 2 wells. And as you can see right now, give or take, there's around 238. And we don't really know the number because ODNR does not keep up with its database. So we've added around, yep.
I just want to clarify. So the vertical drops we're seeing here in the illustration, is that the cement you were talking? Where's the cement that you were talking about?
It goes around the pipe.
Okay, so that's a pipe.
The steel pipe.
That's a pipe, and it's got
Steel
cement
pipe.
around. Okay.
Double-walled steel pipe enclosed in cement.
Okay.
And what you see at the bottom, the injectate will go down into a formation that has, like I said, been approved by ODNR.
Okay, thanks.
And the reason all three are up here is because they're all drilled similarly and constructed in a similar manner.
Okay.
So with the addition of 100 and, permitted and asked to be permitted injection wells, that's all because of the overload of new waste that was coming into, our area where we have injection wells. And next slide. This is a map. We call it the flat map. It just kind of shows dots where injection wells are. You can see that most of them are in eastern Ohio. Eastern Ohio is known as Appalachia. So Appalachia has the most injection wells. It has the most horizontally drilled wells, even though vertical oil and gas wells are kind of scattered throughout the state, except, like you said, Mike, in Southwest Ohio. Next slide. This is kind of similar to Mike's map. It does show this map was created by Frack Tracker Alliance, one of the organizations we work with, and you can see, what this depicts visually for folks, and what we know here on the ground is that where you see the largest brown circles are the largest injection wells in the state. And where you can see those three little triangles, that's down in Washington County, where there is an overwhelming number of people concerned about injection wells in their county. What you can see next to Ohio is Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And as you can see, they have far, far fewer injection wells, even though the majority of hydraulically fractured, horizontally drilled wells are in the Marcellus Shale. We're in the Marcellus and Utica Shale. Now, people think that this is because of the geology, and that is really not true. It is because the EPA still holds primacy in Pennsylvania and in West Virginia. Even though West Virginia has primacy, the EPA, Department of Environmental Protection, has oversight over the well permitting and regulatory programs in West Virginia. The reason, there are two, main one being in the permitting process in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, you must disclose and characterize the injectate. So each company that is going to be applying for a permit must know the characterization of what's going to go into the well. That causes the operator to disclose the hydrocarbons, the BTEX, the ethanes, the amount of radioactivity that's going to be going into these wells. In addition to which, it takes the EPA much longer to go through the permitting process. I'm going to assume it's because they're far more particular about what they are requiring. And it makes a whole lot of sense when you look at it like that. Why is it easier to bring it to Ohio? Ohio is getting the money. West Virginia and Pennsylvania are stricter in their injection wells. That's why we get so much in injection well waste. What Ohio does not do, it does not charge for all of this waste. It only charges for each well, the first 500,000 barrels of waste that goes in. So Ohio is missing this opportunity to actually make enough money off of this toxic radioactive waste that we don't want in the first place to, increase its regulatory oversight on these wells. Okay, next slide.
Could I just clarify one more thing, Roxanne?
Yep.
So the first slide you showed had those open wells, those open pools. Then the second slide you showed how the injection wells are drilled way down, and we saw the waste is stored way underground. If the waste is stored way underground, why were we seeing a pool at ground level in the first photo?
Well, what those open pits turned into were tanks, and you'll see a picture pretty soon of a waste facility that is associated with a very large injection well operation. So that was to show you how I got started and how we in Athens County were alarmed at the fact that there was this open pit of toxic radioactive waste sitting in a farmer's field that anybody could access. And most of those open pit wells, actually, because of our interest in that particular well, Mary Mertz and ODNR sent out cleaned it up or close it up notices to all the open pit operators in the state of Ohio. So I'd like to say it was the people's concern that helped that along. I don't mind saying that at all. So on this slide, it's another version of the previous slide, same slide showing you where the injection wells are. This shows the incredibly uneven distribution of where the waste is going. You can see, and Mike mentioned, Tuscarawas, Washington, and Guernsey are receiving most of the waste from not only in-state but out-of-state. I think Washington County has a little more out-of-state than in-state, as a matter of fact, because it's on the border of West Virginia and Pennsylvania and has access through the highway system. Actually, Washington County right now is the number one, has reached the number one position, sadly, of receiving the most injection waste over the last 15 years. And even though there is the statement on ODNR's website, it's out of date, that there are 17 active injection wells through inspection reports. I've identified the fact that 8 of them aren't even working or have been ordered, closed, and plugged, and I can get into that later. But this just gives you an idea in the audience, just this extraordinarily uneven distribution of these wells. And as you can see, none of them really go past Appalachia. Next slide. So this gives a better picture of injection wells, the large injection wells that have been permitted over the last 15 years, like those tanks you see at the end of the line of trucks. That's the old K&H well that has, as you can see, it's been suspended and plugged. That was after years of migration of brine from the injection wells. You can see those tanks. That's now where the waste is temporarily stored until it can be pumped into the injection well itself. So the trucks unload here and then through a series of pipes, and there were 3 injection wells associated with this operation. You can see the slide, the little slide up on the right-hand corner, upper right. You can see that large tank in the back. That's a 60,000 gallon toxic radioactive waste tank that God only knows what would have happened if that had exploded or leaked. Down in the right-hand corner is one of our wonderful activists who was protesting, our injection wells, and she was thanking Governor Kasich at the time for allowing this to happen. Next slide. This is another example of an injection well site. The one on the upper left-hand corner is K&H. I'm sorry, is Deep Rock Disposal Solutions, LLC. And you can see it's an aerial shot. You can see it is just not very far from the Ohio River. You can see the river on the left. You can see the series of tanks right in the middle. And if you look at the lower right-hand picture, those are trucks unloading their waste, which will then be pumped into those tanks, which will then eventually be pumped into the injection wells that are going to supposedly confine the waste that's injected into it. With a small landmass and a small county, this county has been overwhelmed with the amount of waste that it receives. You can see that spray that's in the upper right-hand corner. That is actually a oil and gas production well under pressurization from migration of brine. And that well is no longer able to produce. And you're not really supposed to go do this. This is toxic radioactive waste, but this is just to demonstrate that when these production wells are under pressure from the migration of brine from these injection wells, this is what happens when you open the valve. No gas, just injectate. Okay, next slide. This is the cream of the crop right here. This is Austin Master Services waste facility. These facilities are also permitted by ODNR. This facility is in Belmont County. Belmont County not only had the waste facility, it has some of the highest injection waste and oil and gas well horizontal drilling. What you're looking at is toxic radioactive solid and liquid waste. This facility was under fire for years from the citizens who lived in Martins Ferry, Belmont County, who protested this for years before the ODNR finally came in and shut it down due to its violation after violation after violation of state laws on how this waste was so-called stored. This is where the word stored can come in, and it, in fact, of course, is supposed to be temporary also. And this liquid is taken to an injection well, and the solids are to be then downblended, and it's supposed to go to a landfill, either in Ohio or Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania gets a lot of our solid waste, and we get their liquid waste. What's in that next slide? And last but not least, what do we do with brine when we go with an antiquated 1985 law in the state of Ohio? The state of Ohio says, sure, it's okay to take oil and gas waste, brine, and spread it on our roads. ODNR in 1985, when this law went into effect, protested it because they knew there was benzene in this waste product. And they thought, ooh, that's not a good idea to put a carcinogenic waste product, hydrocarbons from oil and gas waste. This comes from only conventional wells, not horizontally drilled wells, which have more chemicals in them. Like there's 1,021 chemicals. About 144 or more are carcinogenic. So Ohio still allows brine to be spread on its roads, and Buckeye Environmental Network is working with the legislature on 2 bills to get this antiquated law taken off the books so that toxic radioactive waste is not allowed on our roads. And you can see that the upper right is a brine spreading truck on a dirt road in the summer for dust control. Just think about when that brine dries and it gets dusty, that dust is filled with radioactive particles as well as volatile organic compounds. Transportation issue. Mike mentioned transportation is part of the fracking process. And here is a brine truck trying to get to an injection well that turned over and spilled its products on the ground. So that's just a brief overview. I wanted to talk briefly about the water withdrawals. Water withdrawals is one of the biggest parts of the fracking process, and billions of gallons of water are taken from our fresh water supplies, and even though only about 10% of it is recycled, just alone for extracting oil and gas from our public lands, that's like over 1 billion gallons of water that's going to be used to frack our parks and our public lands. So this is water that never can be returned to the life cycle of water, and it is removed from forever from the water's life cycle. So there are a lot of moving parts in these operations. I chose oil and gas waste brine to study, research, and stay on top of, because this is pretty much a forever in our communities. And I don't believe for 1 minute that ODNR is adequately providing oversight to protect our communities. And I'll stop there because you probably have questions.
Yes. Well, I wanted to, what motivated this was this lawsuit. So you've both given sort of an overview of the industry and how this works, but I wanted to talk about, I mean, the whole point of the lawsuit is that there are apparently risks, right? I mean, we know that these are toxic chemicals, and I assume there's some belief that storing them the way that they're stored deep underground is safe. Yet we're seeing this lawsuit, right, where someone is saying chemicals got into my oil wells, right? The lawsuit in Eastern Ohio. So I was just wondering if we could talk about, realistically, what are the risks of
Well,
this sort of storage?
that's the number one, is the migration of brine out of the injection zone that it's been permitted to be confined in. And the first public evidence and knowledge of migration of brine, which, by the way, ODNR said it will never happen. We protested in Athens until we were hoarse, protesting the injection well applications that were being permitted by ODNR. And the first indication of a problem, where we fondly call Bob Wilson and Bob Lane the Bobs, wonderful gentlemen from Washington County who have many oil and gas production wells, vertical production wells. And they noticed that there was an excessive amount of brine, like, whoa, that's not supposed to be in my well. They called ODNR. ODNR came down. They identified 27 wells that were immediately interacting with migrating brine from a well called the Redbird number 4 in Vito, Ohio, which is Washington County. So what did ODNR do? ODNR said, well, the rules, the laws in the state of Ohio allow an operator to submit a plan. Drill deeper, says ODNR. And the company said, okay, we'll drill deeper. So they plugged off the first well, they drilled deeper to a deeper formation and started injecting into that formation. That did not stop the migration of brine. It actually they're up to about 50 wells now that have been affected. ODNR hired a consultant from Colorado to do a study. That study unequivocally concluded that there was migration of this oil and gas waste from the injection well that affected these oil and gas wells. It also caused ODNR to plug a well near the lake, which is right there below, about a mile below the Redbird injection well. And it also blew out a well in the lake, which ODNR also had to clean up because it was an abandoned well. So the lawsuit is it's active. They're not the only oil and gas producers that have filed a lawsuit against the companies that are causing migration of brine. There are 3 other lawsuits. Those are actually in the Common Pleas Court in Athens County. The lawsuit that the Bobs are involved in has an appeal in the Supreme Court that's kind of stayed things. But in addition to that well, there are 6 wells that were recently suspended, and then 4 of them ordered plugged. 4 of them are now plugged, 3 by the K&H, the first, that slide you saw with all the trucks going up to that well. That was one of the ones that Athens County citizens and our county commissioners and our city council protested. And one that was never going to leak. And those 3 injection wells migrated brine for miles outside of its injection zone, up to 3.5 to 5 miles away. And another well in Athens County, the 4th injection well that was permitted back in 2013, migrated brine. That company went
So just to be
receivership.
when you say the brine migrated, so that means it didn't just move horizontally; it came up vertically.
It fractured the pressure, the volume, and the pressure of what was injected into the formation, caused fracturing of rocks, thus the migration of brine out of its so-called confinement formation. And in the case of the Bobs, and in the case of the other 4 injection wells in Washington or in Athens County, they also migrated upward to the oil and gas wells. So this migration wasn't just horizontal, just zip along the, where it's supposed to stay in confinement. It actually fractured the rock and went upwards. This also happened in Noble County. Two wells in Noble County caused a huge blowout of an abandoned well. So it is not far from people's thoughts that if migration of brine is affecting oil and gas wells, 1,000 to 2,000 feet above where the injectate is, under continued pressure, the expectation is it will reach drinking water sources. There's no doubt in people's minds it will reach drinking water sources. It has in Texas. It has in Oklahoma. So, this is one of the main concerns of people who are protesting these wells.
Mike, I want to give you a chance to talk a bit about these risks and the lawsuits, and just to hear, your perspective or the industry's perspective.
It's been a really interesting dynamic over the last couple of months because, Bob Lane, Bob Wilson, Bobby Anderson, these are actually members of ours. And the Redbird, the Genesis, the Deep Rock, those are members of ours. So we have folks that have been, in some cases, members of ours for 4 years, suing other people in the membership. And so for the trade association to work with members on both sides of this very complicated issue, certainly been an interesting dynamic. Part of that is because injection wells are put after there's something called the area review. The state will say, hey, you want to put an injection well here, what formation, what depth, what pressure, what injection rate, what other injection wells are in this radius? What other production wells are in this radius? What other production wells are in the same formation? And I think that's one thing that the industry and the state has learned is that the difference between a water well, which could be several hundred feet in Ohio, injection wells typically are several thousand feet, and production wells are typically several thousand feet deep. And so what we have learned through this process is that the state has, in some cases, not all, but some, permitted injection well and a production well, maybe way back when, into the same formation. And so we have been talking to the state, the legislature, the industry, injection well operators about the different formation, the different cap rock, step rate tests, pressures, volumes, transportation, storage, about all of these issues. Because one of the things that often gets lost in this is that the people that own and operate Deep Rock, Redbird, all these folks live in Ohio. I live in Ohio. Our membership, for the large part, lives in Ohio. And so making sure that water is protected, obviously, is fundamental to everybody that lives here. Same with air, and as Roxanne was talking about with soil, that's obviously something we don't want to forget in this. So the fact that there was this lawsuit filed has really brought some issues to the forefront, and that's why there's been some effort recently with some new, and I would argue tougher and more stringent injection well rules here in the state of Ohio. There has not been a new permit issued under these new rules. We also are working on a piece of legislation. It's going to be kind of an all-encompassing oil and gas bill for the first time in, probably 10 years or so, that will look at all of these production issues, a lot of these injection issues, and what have we learned over the last 5, 10, 15 years as an industry, as a state, as, a region, looking at what's happening in our sister states in PA and West Virginia. How are they handling these types of issues? And it was mentioned, our friends down in Texas and Oklahoma, they've got some seismicity issues that they're managing, and transportation issues as well too. And so they're very real challenges, one that we're trying to take head on because we want to make sure that we're responsible operators, and particularly for our membership, which is about 500 member companies, and we've been around since 1947. So as an industry and an association, we knew life before class two and sort of during, and then sort of this long-term planning. And we really haven't talked much about it, but there's some concepts about what are called class 6 wells. There's 6 classes. Roxanne had a slide that kind of talked about them. And some of that class 6 will be carbon capture and storage. And so what is the difference, and how are they regulated and operated on a class 2 wastewater well and a class 6 carbon well? And what can we learn and apply to both of those processes? So a very real and legitimate conversation.
So it sounds like the industry isn't denying that there are risks. I mean, they're not, because I had gotten the sense when I first researched this that the industry was saying, no, these are absolutely safe methods of storage, or permanent storage. But
I think that's why you have laws in place, right? Laws mitigate risks, whether that's in car travel, injection wells, whatever it may be. And so what we do know is that we have a strong record here in the state of Ohio, because it is run by the state with the full weight and authority of the Attorney General's office. And so if there are bad actors or actors that have made a mistake, the state and the Ohio Attorney General can come down on those folks.
Well,
and we
but also
in that case.
But also, I'm wondering about these are, because they're risks, and because you can predict that there could be something catastrophic happening, like if these chemicals are migrating into oil production wells, then they certainly could migrate into the water table for some communities, which could be catastrophic. I'm wondering, in addition to, say, the state having certain laws to try to mitigate that risk, what about, is there any sort of insurance fund or guarantee from the state or from the federal government or from the industry that if this happens, it's predictable that it could happen, there's a real risk, it's a realistic thing to imagine, given that these are things that we guarantee will do if
No,
that happens? So there's no attempt to try to reassure people, or
there are bonding requirements for operators across all spectrums of oil and gas. And our biggest concern in the industry is more about surface. And I think Roxanne had a photo about a truck that rolled over. And so, we have some things working in our favor. Physics, water and gravity are going to be pulled down, not pulled up. We also have the overbearing pressure of what could be over a mile of rock pushing that water down. So there's some physics that play in our favor here. So while we are mindful of what is happening underground, which is why it's called UIC, underground injection control, more of the conversation has been talked about with surface issues, transportation, storage tanks, what are called secondary containment. Roxanne had I think one of her photos was the K&H tank, and what you saw was that liner, which is designed to hold, 100% plus some. So if there was a catastrophic failure in that tank, plus it was raining, plus it rained yesterday, that secondary containment would hold that liquid. And so our priority is protection of all of the water surface, whether they're surface or subsurface. The bigger issue is making sure that there are no leaks on the surface, because subsurface with steel and cement, and it's not concrete, right? This is not sidewalk cement. This is a special cement slurry that's not going to be exposed to the elements of rain and freeze and thaw and that. And so, yes, to your question, real and legitimate concerns. That's why there's laws in place to mitigate that risk. But the bigger focus is really making sure we don't have any surface spill.
Mike, I'm dying here. I just have to respond to this. Mike Mercier, if you don't mind, I'm going to spew out some facts. Fact. Yes, there are new rules in the state of Ohio to try to mitigate some of the problems of this so-called, actually ODNR called it unprecedented migration of brine from injection wells. And in addition to which, there is another lawsuit that was that Earth Justice and Buckeye Environmental Network is one of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit for ODNR not using the new rules for permitting 2 wells in Washington County when those new rules were in effect when these permits were being reviewed and permitted. So when you say there's no injection wells that have been permitted under the new rules, that's also not true, because one of the Arrowhead Road Services wells was permitted under the new rules. It was never drilled. And it is in the sister to a well that has just been suspended by ODNR for not doing the gravity test correctly and for overpressurizing the well under trial of the PSI that's used. That's pounds per square inch. That's the pressure allowed by ODNR. That well was suspended, and the Oil and Gas Commission allowed it to keep on injecting under the pressure that ODNR had said it was not safe to do. So, saying that these rules are to mitigate and protect our communities and our drinking water sources is just what people are really angry about. Every time we find a well that has violated the laws, that ODNR has issued violation after violation after violation and compliance notice and suspension order and plugging orders, and the company ignores it, and ODNR does nothing about it. So the idea, Mike Mercier, that you brought up, does UGA have an insurance pool for, to take care of problems that come from their members that they were violated by, injection wells and ruined their businesses, which then disallowed heating, gas heating to go to people's homes in the middle of winter. I mean, the stories just go on and on and on and on. We could be here all night if we had time to do that. And these UGA members, I have been very fortunate to meet some of the oil and gas producers in Washington County. They have no faith in UGA. They have no faith in SUGA. These are supposed to help protect them, and ODNR is supposed to help protect communities. And ODNR pays for a cleanup of an injection well or an oil and gas well site in Noble County. They sued the owner of the well. That owner is suing Deep Rock. They say, well, we didn't do it. You did it by overpressurizing your injection and your volumes. So it's the fact that there are bonds, those bonds are really weak. The insurance policies pay for a catastrophic event that may or may not happen. Well, there was a pretty catastrophic event in Athens County at the Reliable Resources. The amount of leakage and contamination from that well. What did Reliable Resources do? They walked away. What did ODNR do? Put it in the orphan well program, and the state of Ohio had to pay for it. So,
don't forget that fund is funded through oil and gas severance taxes. So those are our wells that are our responsibility.
Yeah, which UGA is encouraging the state of Ohio to pass a law to give those fees to counties to bribe them into liking injection. So
that is part of 219 is to pass some of that money on to counties. I disagree. We think the bonding requirements are very strong, and the severance taxes there's $200 some odd million in that fund to plug wells. And I think that's one thing we haven't talked enough about is there are a number of wells that should be plugged and probably will be in the not too distant future. Because that's a big
but they're not. There's the new law is targeting oil and gas wells near injection wells, not the methane leaking wells that are causing climate and health problems, Mike. We clearly
doing
it's
been clear. Hold on, Roxanne, you've gone on long enough, and so there's been about 200 wells that are plugged every year from the state through this program. And so to say that there's not been progress made is false. The fact that we do take responsibility for our orphan and abandoned wells is also false. We do take responsibility for that. And so to dismiss those things is not genuine. And you and I have had this conversation in countless hallways and parking lots across Eastern Ohio for 15 years. And we certainly agree to disagree on that. But at the end of the day, the oil and gas industry and those guys, what if they don't have faith in us? Well, they're still paying membership dues and they're still active in conversations. And they have a very different opinion on this matter than the injectional operators do. And so we have opinions from across the board on this matter. And that's why we're taking it so seriously, because as a membership-based organization, well, my God, you better figure out what your membership needs and get engaged and solve these problems. And particularly, now, because of how important and relevant this is.
We've got a lot of audience questions. If we could start going through those, because I did promise the audience. So someone asks, does the oil and gas industry acknowledge that production waste or brine waste can migrate after it's injected and can purge to the surface? I guess we talked about that. It does, right? Yeah.
Well, and that's what's so interesting is that, like, when you talk about Mr. Lane and Mr. Wilson, they produce crude oil and natural gas, but they will also produce brine. And so them having issues with brine that they very well may have produced 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago with their 100 some on wells. And so this issue is very personal to them because they have a business and they've got other interests, but think of this is crude oil production. And they also have brine production, and them along with the other membership that also produces, and then other section that manages. So our people are intimately involved in finding a solution here, because not only are they producing brine, they're also injecting brine, particularly the gentlemen that have filed this lawsuit. So it's a real serious issue that we have to wrap our heads around and solve.
Someone asks, how is the data center boom influencing oil and gas development in Ohio? The AI data centers.
There are a number of newly proposed, permitted, financed, and under construction natural gas-fired power generations that will be what are called behind the meter, so not on the electric grid. So if Meta or Google or Amazon or whoever's building these facilities would have their own power, so it wouldn't be taking off the grid. I think that's probably one of the biggest elements. I think the other thing too is you heard some of the announcements that there be a new power facility that may be one of the largest in the country and the world down in Chillicothe. So there may be some new power gen and also pipeline projects to get that natural gas from where it's produced to where it will be turned from hydrocarbons to into electricity.
I have a response to that also. And of course, this is all done once again with the state of Ohio not bothering to do the deep research that needs to be done to look at the consequences and effects of increasing oil and gas extraction, lax EPA rules, reducing EPA rules so that water NPDES permits can be more easily distributed. I mean, I'd like to listen to the gentleman who talked about the data centers, and there's a lot to this, and it's a whole nother session, and you already had one, but Ohio lacks the ability, the fortitude, the desire to take the long, hard look at these industries to see what effects they're having in our communities. And I might add, if you look at the population that has left Appalachia, it's in the areas where the most oil and gas booms have happened, and injection wells are happening. Harrison, Belmont County, those two counties also have public lands that are going to be fracked, which Save Ohio Parks has been working on. I've worked with them for, in the beginning of their organization. So, we are driving people out of Appalachia in the middle of a historic oil and gas extraction extravaganza, and the industry touting the fact that billions of dollars are being made, factories are happening, and data centers are going to happen. And once again, Appalachia is left as a sacrifice zone, just like it was with the coal industry.
Someone asks, why is the water radioactive?
Radium nuclides come from the breakdown of uranium. From that comes radium-226, 228, thorium, radionuclides that are deep in the earth. That's where they're supposed to stay. They're not supposed to be up on the ground. Yes, there's background radiation in soils, but when this is part of the toxic radioactive waste. When that radium-226 and 228 comes up, 226 lasts for 1,600 years. So
you're saying it's not part of the brine, what's used by the oil industry to to do the fracturing and drilling.
Correct. It's not used
Comes
in the
from the
drilling
ground.
process.
Okay.
It's part of the extraction. Yes, it's part of the oil and gas. Yes,
All right.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Let's see. What's the ratio, if you know this, what's the ratio of oil and gas to waste,
Like production?
I guess? For every X amount of oil or gas that's produced, how much waste is there, if you can quantify?
You know, in a typical oil and gas well, I don't know that I can put a number to it, but over the life of a shale well, which we predict will probably go 40 or 50 years, you know, oil and gas will be produced as well as brine. Now, you get a lot of that initial production in the first few years, and then it drops off and then remains steady. That's consistent with brine as well, too. Because there's really three fluids when you talk about oil and gas. You drill on a synthetic mud, which goes down and comes back up. You have a hydraulic fracturing fluid, which is water that carries sand and chemicals to actually fracture the rock, and then the sand keeps it open. Some of the chemicals are like biocides, to Roxanne's early points, so that we don't corrode our steel, kills some of the bacteria in there. And then the third fluid is the brine that comes back up. And, you know, she's right when she talks about, you know, it's naturally occurring, it's deep, it's old seawater, it has all kinds of materials in it. And so we use those three fluids for the course of drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and then production. The mud is recovered and reused. The hydraulic fracturing fluid goes down and will go flow back. You're going to get that first when you put the well into production. And then when that's all come back to service, that's when the brine comes back up. And then you will get brine, although less and less throughout the months and years, but that will be produced through the life of that well.
Okay. Someone asks, so Ohio has more lax rules when permitting Class 2 wells?
No, ODNR has to use the US EPA's rules. It's their program that we operate under. So same rules.
Yep. Yes, they do.
They do not. No, they are required to use the exact same
the one federal law that primacy makes the state of Ohio have is to protect underground drinking water sources, which is, of course, what EPA will look at. Is that happening? And of course, we do expect it to happen someday. The biggest problem in Ohio, and whether UGA agrees with this or not, because they won't, because it continues saying how there's no problems. And, I must give a shout out to my good friend Jenny Morgan, who got really upset when Rob Brundett said, no problems of oil and gas. There's no incident. It's all safe. It's all wonderful. And she did the deep dive into Ohio data that showed, in just 10 years' time, there were 2,500 incidents. Buckeye Environmental Network is doing some of the research with Fracker Alliance to show that the oil and gas regulatory oversight, is just lacking in ability to do its job. It's probably lack of funding. I don't blame, who's inside ODNR as much as I blame the legislature, but you cannot have laws that give power to the chief of the Division of Oil and Gas to take care of problems, and then they don't get taken care of. So no matter how strict the laws are and how good the rules are, Mike said there aren't any injection wells wanting to go under those new rules yet. The oversight is greatly lacking. So it doesn't matter how great the laws are in the state of Ohio. They're not being implemented where they should be. And I have looked at in violation after violation after violation after compliance notice and suspension, till I'm crying over the fact that, ODNR does not enforce its regulations the way they should to keep communities safe.
Somebody says here, I study oil and gas incidents/accidents that ODNR keeps on file. They said it's called the Daily Accident Report, Ohio Oil and Gas. There's an oil and gas incident logged every day and a half. If anyone studies these incidents or violations, if anyone studies injection wells, every well seems to have issues, violations, major concerns. What a researcher will find. ODNR does not seemingly have the resources to go after all these violations. They go unaddressed for years and years.
Understand there are classifications, right? And so if there is a gallon of fluid spilled on a well pad,
Right.
that's a violation, right? Now, is that catastrophic? No, but you still have to report it, and so there are classifications. Sometimes there are very small, hey, you're missing a sign. Sometimes you need to paint your tank. So there are minor violations, and then it escalates throughout. So this number that keeps getting tossed around there of violations, some of those are most of them, the vast majority of them, the overwhelming vast majority of them are your sign needs fixed. You spilled a gallon of fluid on your facility. Your gate wasn't locked. Things of that nature. So let's understand what they mean by incident. An incident is still something you have to report, but that doesn't mean that there was an explosion, a fatality, something left the well pad. There's a very long list of things that you have to comply to. And some of them are those very minor, hey, you still have to put your sign up. You still have to do these shifts, still have to do that. And when you don't, this is where I would counter Roxanne's point. DNR on these facilities every day issuing these violations. So you can't say in one breath that they're not doing their job and then say 2,500 violations. So which is it? I would argue that they're out every day doing their job, which is why they're saying, hey, don't forget you have to do this. Don't forget you have to do
They're issuing the violations, and the chief and the division is not following up on those violations, issuing fines and making these violations come into compliance. That's what I'm talking about, Mike. And that is true. And this daily accident report is my friend that I just referenced. And if people want to see what's really going on inside and look at the database, remember, we get our information from public record requests, research, and the database at ODNR. The ODNR was the first to identify radium-226 and 228 after we as citizens insisted that they needed to inspect and test conventional wells, particularly for oil and gas waste brine spreading. And they also did hydraulically fractured, horizontally drilled wells. And every one of the wells had amounts of radium, some of them in amounts that were astounding. So this is what we're dealing with, ladies and gentlemen. This is the state of Ohio's injection well. And it's the waste is a problem, and it's going to continue to be a problem. And if those rules and if those laws were actually, if the chief was empowered to enforce this stuff, we wouldn't have so many problems. And we probably wouldn't have as many injection wells. And that then is a problem for the oil and gas industry.
So we're over time now. There were so many questions. I just want to take a couple more. So someone asks, why did the taxpayers have to pay to clean up the spewing injection wells in Noble County? And the follow-up to that is, who will pay to clean Washington County's aquifers if they're contaminated?
Those were done clean up by the severance tax, so the well fund. So those are fees that the industry pays to the state, where the state holds to then go do their inspections, their plugging, their cleanup. And so they were not taxpayer dollars. Those are severance tax fees. So when our producers sever minerals, oil and gas, whatever they may be, coal has it, timber, everybody has it. So when you sever that, you pay into that fee, the state has it, and then they can use that to run their program. And in this case, plug wells, things like that.
You contaminate a drinking water source and nobody's going to clean that up. That's going to be on the citizens. And as you well know, the PFAS lawsuit got settled. The DuPont PFAS lawsuit. PFAS is also one of the injectate, or one of the things that goes down an injection well. And that money is going to be paid out to communities who've had their public water sources contaminated with PFAS. So citizens have every right to be concerned. And the people of Washington County are on fire about this. They're learning that 8 of their injection wells, aren't even operating properly. They've had incident reports. All of their water systems, public water systems, are within a couple miles of the injection wells that are closest to the Ohio River. So, no matter what the oil and gas industry says, no matter how powerful it is, and it will never be able to convince people like the Bobs and the people in the lawsuits that there is not harm, a great deal of harm that has been inflicted on communities, and the potential is out there. When you look at when I read about the incidents in Texas and Oklahoma, and the number of earthquakes and the number of the migration of brine to the surface. It's a problem. It is a serious, serious problem. And
Well, we have one last question, and then we'll have to end because we're over. But someone asks, are there plans after Mike DeWinter's office to put frac pads directly on public lands? And I don't know what pads are. I assume you.
well, Matt Huffman, in the Ohio House has said if Vivek Ramaswamy gets elected, that's going to change, and they're going to see frac pads wherever the state of Ohio wants to put them. So right now, the mineral leases are for to be drilled underneath the parks, but that doesn't prevent oil and gas pads from being placed around the park, a frac pad.
That's where an operator will lease someone's property to build a 3 to 5 acre piece of ground where we can put our drilling equipment and then our frac crews, and actually where the wellhead and the well tank are. So a well pad is where all this activity would take place. And good question, because yes, right now we foresee in the future that those will remain on private land, because remember, we're drilling 5-mile laterals. And so they don't need to be, we don't want them to be, they aren't going to be on state land or even in federal land when you can put them on private land and drill a 5-mile lateral under
They can put a pad 1,000 feet outside Salt Fork, Mike. That's State of Ohio Parks has been working on this issue for now over 3 years. And the amount of research they've done is they're fighting as hard as they can to, try to get Ohio to not be doing this. So
you can also put a manufacturing facility. You can also put a gas station. You can do all of that stuff.
Probably not going to happen, though, but that could be a frac pad. Could I just take a second to, if you can see what I put in the chat, I don't know if you can. If people want to know more about this issue, there is going to be on April 28th, ProPublica publication is going to have a discussion with 3 journalists about the wastewater problem in Texas, Oklahoma, and in Ohio. So there'll be a lot more in-depth review of what's going on across the country if anybody wants to join that. Thanks.
Okay. One more thing. Someone asked if we could make your slides available if you're open to. If not, that's fine.
Yes. Sure.
Is that okay with you, Mike?
Yeah, we're pulling from the same, in a lot of cases, DNR, EPA, EIA, a lot of the different perspectives. And I would have never have guessed a conversation between Roxanne and Mike Chadsey went over time. I would have never fathomed that would have been a possibility.
We should have set more time for this. So.
Look, I won't speak for Roxanne, but obviously you have a lot of passion and dialogue on these issues. They're not going to go away, and we use energy. Well, Roxanne's off the grid, but for most of us, energy is a very important issue. And as we see oil, gas, wind, solar, nukes, all that stuff happening in Ohio and beyond, these issues will always be at the forefront. They're probably more political than they should be. Energy should be a nonpartisan issue, but too oftentimes we get dragged into political conversations where we don't need to be and don't want to be. But energy and our challenges and opportunities are very important for Eastern Ohio, Southeastern Ohio, and across the state. So appreciate the opportunity to be here and have the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you.
And I invite people to look into solar panels and getting themselves a little less dependent on energy resources out there. I've been living like this for a very, very long time. And look, I even have a computer. So see, you can have all of the conveniences that anybody that lives lives on the grid has. And it was good to see you, Mike Chadsey. I know we'll see each other again and probably again. And Mike Mercier, thank you and your group for having us on.
Oh, thank you. It was really interesting, and we had a lot more questions that we can't get to.
Yeah, sorry we couldn't get to those. It's
all right.
Big subject.
Not talking about. No, thanks for the opportunity, and I appreciate the open and honest dialogue.
All right. Well, thank you, and thanks to the audience for joining us, and we'll see you on Thursday.